help with like
Sorry, I forgot to hit record.
it does help with like uh, the the actual process that's happening during detect, and it takes that like from the spec to the actual website. But we still need some examples, I believe, either in samples or something that is more complicated um, than just what we have right now. I don't think we have any complicated examples that use that other kind of detect in the samples repository. We mainly just have like one-off pass or fail build packs.
Yeah, I think the samples, at least when it started, right, it was more so that we can have something to like dog food and test, right, in a almost acceptance or end-to-end test. They weren't really expected to be like very high fidelity examples of very specific solutions. It definitely sounds like that would be extremely helpful. I just don't know that we have any like real formal process for those things to actually materialize. And it's more like, yeah, okay, so we've identified that we want them, right? We need them and stuff, but like who's gonna actually do it or what's gonna be the forcing function that makes us actually create those? I think that's where we're
This,
at right now.
this sounds like another thing that would fit really well into the best practices stuff. Right. So that I think at first Heroku had some different ideas about how they were going to use this.
Yeah,
And since Paquito is kind of like, they have some patterns that seem like they work pretty well now, it's probably a good idea to start capturing some of that.
because I was having like a similar conversation around best practices the other day, which is like if you have uh, build packs, so like should you have like a specialized build pack for like each single thing, or should you have like one generic build pack that's just like a system manager and you leave it to the user to decide? Like they can specify the dependency and the like package manager can install things, or do you individually write a build pack for like special use cases? And I've also gotten a debate like which one is better over the other, like whether it's worth maintaining, like whether it's worth the overhead of maintaining individual build packs, or whether you should just provide like a generic one that does everything. uh, I'd be curious to hear like other people's thoughts, but I was more of the opinion that if you can use extra metadata from the project to provide a better experience rather than just like a generic file that people shove more repetitive stuff into, that's better, even if it means like a specialized build pack. But I think people might have different opinions on that.
I think I worked on the Paquito project. I think we came to similar conclusions, right? But I don't know if that's just, based off of where we started out, or whether that's like a pattern that you will always follow no matter where you start. That's hard.
I mean, a lot of the build packs that I author are based on the Paketo ideology more so than the Heroku one. So I may also be biased by the same ideology. But um, yeah,
You know, that's really interesting. And I think at this point we're just talking more generally, right? But it does seem like, at least maybe personally for me, like the scope or the domain of like the actual build pack authoring process, that's something that is like absent as a platform implementer. Like yeah, I know what a build pack is and I know like some of the API interactions with it, but as a build pack author, like what things we could do in the project to improve that, it seems like that's absent. And I don't really hear it all too often, right? I hear it and maybe every once in a while, but typically it seems like there's this separation between like whether it be the Heroku people that implement the actual build packs or the Paketo project as a whole, right? Or even like the Google, which I think they never really talked to us about their build packs and how they work, but like we don't have that line of communication with uh those groups. And so I think I don't know what can be done, but maybe there, I don't know, Sam, or I know Dan, you have some history there, but Sam, have you looked at the Paquito project and like interacted with their working groups and all that?
Which Sam are you talking to?
Oh, uh, you, Sam, not
Okay.
the absent Sam. Yeah.
I have interacted with the Paquito project. I mean, I contributed to Packet, and I've like used some of the build packs when I was originally testing things. I've interacted less so with the Heroku ones, but the Paquito ones have been useful because they're like singular build packs that do one thing and one thing good. So it's easy to plug and play. And I think a lot of the RFCs I've been opening have been around like my experience as a build pack author trying to fill in all these gaps uh,
Right.
around our use cases. I I think if we had like more build pack authors attending these meetings, we would come up with even more common use cases. Um, but yeah,
So how do we drag, let's say the Paquito team into these conversations, or should we be going to their working groups?
I know they do attend it like at times when something breaks or something new is introduced. uh, but that's about like I haven't interacted with them much, but just like I helped out with their equivalent of libcnb to get it up to date with uh, the buildback API. That's pretty much all the interaction I have with them. Mm, But yeah, it. I mean, maybe we can ask. Like I know, so a couple of RFCs I filed actually were based off of my conversations with Paquito people. Like the uh, so there was one which I am supposed to do, but I haven't done till now, which was around like process environment variables being in layers instead of somewhere else. That was something that came from like a feedback from Paquito maintainers. Um, and I think there were a couple others which I'm forgetting, but like a couple of my RFCs were based on my interactions with Paquito. Uh, but yeah, I don't have much today apart from like these things.
Yeah, I've gone to some of their syncs in the past. I could definitely start doing that again. But I think that some of the awkwardness between that is because we already have a Go bindings library, right? And they have their own one. That's like, well, like this is not project related. We've been doing our own thing, right? So
They have two of them, so there's
There's even that, yeah. I know we had that conversation earlier about the future of libcnb. Is that the right one? The one that we maintain? I don't recall. What was the outcome of that?
in the last working group meeting, the outcome was that Terence would be creating an RFC to either repurpose the distribution team or propose a build pack authors team that would then take on the maintenance of libcnb and incorporate the feedback from the past meetings. I think the conclusion was it was easier to just change libcnb to be similar to Packet rather than pull Packet out of Pacato and remove the parts that are Pacato specific and have something generic. Um,
Cool. Do we know who's owning that RFC by any chance?
Terrence.
Terrence.
actually, what are these Pacato specific parts of that library?
So they have this whole notion of putting things in the Buildpack toml. So like you describe your dependencies, your like version resolution. So there's like I quite like that plug and play thing, but it's also a lot of like Picado specific things where a lot of information on how detect and build works is just driven off of the Buildpack toml. Um, which I mean, this was also something we should like. I was gonna create an RFC about, which was around documentation for build packs and how pack can be used to like better display environment variables files or like dependencies contributed by a build pack or how to use it. And the Paquito ones like already have a lot of this information. Like they have the default values for different environment variables, like what they do and things. But that would have been a good source of like keeping it true to what detect and build is actually doing and making sure that the documentation is consistent with like detecting, because that's the other thing where your build back is doing something else, your documentation says something else, and they drift apart. I don't know if that's been a common issue, but um, that that's also irritating once that happens. So, uh, but yeah, that would have also been like really nice as a user, as an app developer, not as like a author. That if you have a builder, you can check the documentation for the included build packs and see um, what it expects and what's going to happen, um, or which environment variables can you set, or which files is it looking for. I guess the good thing about having POSIX like conventions is that you can just boil it down to environment variables and files most of the times. And if you could just put that in the build pack normal documentation, maybe pack can parse it in a nice way.
And what is the purpose of displaying this sort of information? Is it to provide additional visibility to the end user, or is it for kind of like debugging or troubleshooting
It's
for
more
the build pack author?
so like you, let's say a platform owner gives you a builder and you want to figure out like what this build pack does. The only link you have right now is really just the homepage. So you do pack inspect builder, you go to the homepage for each build pack and see the documentation. And like most other like package ecosystems have like the inline documentation or something like a README attached to the package itself. So if we consider build packs or packages, we should have something like pack builder. You give the name minus minus help, and that prints out some information around like the build packs, how they're expected to be used, and what's going to be the output or something like that.
Yeah.
So
I think that this would be like, we have this inspect builder command that'll list the build packs, but then if you could see the provides and requires and how they could potentially match up in a group, that would be like, oh, okay. Also make this problem that you're having around visualizing how build packs interact during detection much easier, right?
yeah, but I guess provides and requires are harder to capture because you need to run the detect stage. Whereas if you just have some hard coded documentation that you can just pull up and render as a markdown or something like that. Uh, I think the main, at least issue that I have seen around adoption is that this does something magical and people are not used to that, and they at least want to figure out how to tweak certain things. And the only way to do that is to go to the canonical documentation for a specific build pack. And oftentimes it's hard to discover that from your platform. So you need to go back to the individual build pack itself rather than use the platform you actually use to create the images. So like if pack or whatever else had some help command that could provide some information right there and then around this is what this build pack does and this is what it is detecting or something like that. Anyway,
Yeah.
That's a
Like-
super cool idea. I love that.
Like I wonder how much this plays in with that RFC we have for pack interact, like an interaction mode where you could actually hopefully see a little bit more detail. So like for instance, right, like the provide and requires, you could run detect and at that point just inspect that before actually running the next phase.
but again, the issue with that is like it will tell you that detect failed. You'll have to then figure out like what you need to do to make it pass. You need like some information there, I guess, which
Right.
um, like it's essentially like minus minus help for a CLI tool like back for a specific builder, where it's just nice to have more information in while you're using it.
Yeah. Totally, I agree. I know that there's certain individuals that I guess maybe are more down that path, right? Where they want to bring a lot of that app developer UX centric issues and improvements. So that'd be really cool to see. And it's funny how it ties in back to like the build pack author, because a lot of this seems like it also helps like the build pack authors just like build their build packs, right? Like, why is this thing failing? Like, that quick loop of like trying it out, getting a little bit more information than just a random error or exit code would be great.
Well, it sort of goes back to that principle of when providing an error, you should also do your best to provide where one might look for the solution.
Yep.
So like a lot of language syntax error point where the error happened, and they also say like at least the newer good languages say that okay, this is what the error is. Like you're missing a semicolon here, or your indentation is incorrect, or this is where you should fix things. So I don't know if detect should, because one other issue right now with detect, and this was also something I noticed in the kpac chat right now, is that the logs from detect only show up when you run it with verbose mode. Is there
Mm.
any history behind that? Like why does it only happen when verbose mode is set to true? Is it because you're running all of these things in parallel and you don't want the crazy amount of output to flood?
I see
Yeah.
Dan nodding.
So I think that it was crazy output. One of the things we started distributing was like at least for Potato was large builders. And so you detect on every single group in parallel. And then it's like, well, I only care about Python, but I'm seeing 10 line or like 10 pages of Go detection output. So yeah, that was overwhelming.
Because that, I guess, also causes um, I don't know. I wonder if like pack should just put those build logs somewhere, like a temp build logs or something like that, instead of just throwing it away and only putting it when it's in verbose mode, so that if something fails, it can say detect failed, detection logs at temp slash blah, and go check that out. And then if it passes, you can just clean up those logs after like everything is passed. I guess I think after the build has passed.
Yeah, that's a pretty good idea, right? I think there's pattern very similar to that with like maybe even Docker or Containerd, where it really just points you somewhere else to go look at the logs. Even though I think theirs is worse because you have to figure out where the logs are, right?
Yeah, but I think the main like I'm at this point for me, it's mainly about adoption and how the UX around this can be better than what Docker offers. Because with Docker, people can see, okay, this is the run command, this is the copy command, and they get some idea of what's happening. Whereas here, it's mostly just the build logs, and then if your application doesn't match a build pack, you have no output, like no information coming back to you. Maybe the other thing would be if we can. I don't know if we differentiate between standard error and standard out for detect right now. Maybe if something goes to one or the other, it would be displayed even in non-verbose mode. Uh, because that's also something I've not seen right now.
Yeah, I definitely recall something in regards to that. And I think people wanted just the general logs to be split based on standard error and standard out, but not so much what the actual issues were, right? Like not the actual error itself would go to standard error, but like let's say verbose would go to standard error and you would have everything else go to standard out. I don't recall exactly what the outcome of that was, but I do recall it was kind of controversial just because there wasn't a real agreement on exactly what it should be. So I think the problem needed to be determined first before the solution, if that makes sense.
Cool.
Yeah. Just as like tying this together, I think that there's some like I feel like we're getting a lot of feedback from you around this like idea of like this magical layer and building trust there, letting people do inspection on what's happening, not making it too magical. So there's definitely work to do there.
I mean, it's great when it works. 90% of the time, that's what people want. When it doesn't work and people get annoyed, and you have all these layers of abstractions you have to uncover to figure out what went wrong. That's like when people complain, and that's when like as a platform owner, like the support burden increases exponentially. When people can't figure out what's going wrong, and you have to try and reproduce these issues, like not with the platform, but like their application and what process the build pack took. That's like a really hard thing to figure out as a platform owner or an operator would. Yeah.
Yep, totally. So I guess I know we have like the action item of like an RFC that hopefully will give this sort of goal to somebody to follow, like maintainers, hopefully, right? To then follow and pursue, trying to satisfy the build pack author persona a little bit better. Are there any other action items that we could take from this whole conversation?
I think maybe like figuring out that documentation RFC or like an implementation impact for that. Like if we can introduce a metadata field or some other field like homepage for like either a file name that buildpack authors can point to, which would be included in the documentation, or just like the actual string itself that they want to put for users. Um, Maybe that, and this other one around like putting detection logs in some temporary file. I think that can just be a pack issue.
Yeah. So this, I see the value. I think I personally have like a backlog of RFCs that I have to do. Um, are any other people interested? in pursuing it?
I can.
Well, funny you asked. Yeah, I can do this. I'll try and sync up with some of the Potato people too, see what they think. So I think they have an open sync, and I'll run this idea by Terrence.
Cool. And the pack issue, should I just create that, or either of you?
Yeah. Yeah, I think we'll definitely want to discuss it a little bit more, and maybe we could take that to the platform sync and then just kind of dig into it exactly at what we're trying to achieve and how we would maybe even implement it. But yeah, an issue seems like a really good start to keep track of it.
And there was like, I noticed you created the issue for the metadata, like project metadata. Uh,
Mhm.
should we also create one for remote fetching? Or
Oh, yes. Did I not create that one? I know I have a couple action items in this document. No, I haven't. But yeah, I do have to do that. I guess unless Sam, you have some free time and want to throw something together. But
that's
otherwise I
an
can take care
issue,
of it.
right? Like that doesn't need to be an RFC, right? That's just an issue.
Right. Yeah. I think if anything, it might become like a, what is it, like the sub-team RFC, just to like really specify exactly what protocols and credentials we'll use. But again, a really good start for just an issue, and then maybe it doesn't even have to go to that length. If we find that there's a very specific use case we want to solve, like just, checking out from GitHub public repos, right? Like that's very easy, trivial thing to do.
Yeah.
So, and I know like you had the initial idea, right? So it'd be interesting to get your take on what the exact use case is.
Cool.
Cool.
I mean, and if we do implement some Git credential manager sort of thing, that would also solve my Go issue, where I don't costs.
Well, hey, if you could get 2 for 1, but I do think at that point, right, like that would be bigger scope. So that would probably require an RFC. But we could definitely latch onto it, that's for sure.
Yeah. Cool.
Is there anything else anybody like to discuss? I know Emily said she was gonna try to join the second part, but if there's
Oh,
nothing,
yeah, I mean, I came to ask permission to schedule for the next 2 sessions, but I see that we have something next time, so we'll take the 2 after that. Is that all right? I want to do a workshop. Natalie and I want to do a workshop to share out the user research that we did.
cool, yeah, that'd be awesome. And we'll promote it as well during the working group.
Okay, wonderful. So 5, 6, and 5:13, those are good. We can take those 2 sessions. Wonderful.
Please do. Yep.
All right, great. Sam, I love hearing about your experience here. It's super interesting. I feel like we should we should schedule some time to chat if you'd be open to that. I know you obviously have a full-time job and you're doing us a favor by being here, but
Yeah, sure.
could I maybe get an hour on your calendar sometime in the next couple weeks?
Yeah, we can chat over Slack and figure out the scheduling details.
Okay, amazing. Thank you.
Cool. Both of the Sams working together, that's like magical. That's yeah. Good stuff. Good
Yeah.
stuff. All right. Last call. Anything else?
All good for me.
Cool. Awesome. Well, have a great rest of your week.
Yeah.